Sex workers of Reddit, have any of you ever have a close friend or anyone you normally interact with daily be a surprise customer? What was the experience like, and how did it affect your interactions with them? Not a worker though funny story. One night, my best mate was in town, lived in another state, used to live here. We went out clubbing and eventually decided to go to the strippers. Pay our money, and as we enter, my friend notices a stripper laying on her back spread eagle for a guy. Highly drunk, he yells out, "Hell yeah, how good is this?" The stripper hears and notices my friend, sits up and yells, "What are you doing in here?" My friend instantly went and sat in the corner proper embarrassed. Turns out, it was his cousin. My much younger brother was getting married, had a bachelor party at a strip club with a dozen of so high school friends. After about an hour there, a rather ordinary looking stripper comes on stage, takes off her top, and our tables of guys goes wild, standing, and applauding, and hollering. I have no idea what is going on. The stripper looks through the stage lights, her eyes got really big, she grabs her top, and runs off stage to the back. Bouncers come running over to our table, thinking we're starting trouble. Nope, it turns out, all of the guys in his high school class had a history class with her, a few years back. She later came out and talked with us, said she never thought she'd see someone, let alone 12, she knew. It was in the next town over. Not a sex worker, but found out a girl from high school, that I had a crush on, was a stripper. It was my buddy's bachelor party. We load up in a van and head about an hour away to a better strip club. We get in and settle at a table. About 30 minutes in, I get a tap on the shoulder, and this sexy ass chick hops in my lap. She calls me by the nickname I had in high school and hugs me. She was always tomboyish in high school, never wore makeup, always competed well in gym, kinda nerdy, quiet, and reserved, but always very pretty if you thought about it. I didn't recognize her for a full minute. It was a fun reunion. It was a full nude spot and she gave no F during her stage performance. Really seeing everything I really should have tried to pursue it in HS. But I was a dumbass back then. TLDR, she was a stripper and gave one hell of a show. Not a sex worker, but know a couple current or former who have worked in brothels, and they could see clients when they entered and choose not to come meet them, if they recognized them, or if they just didn't feel like working at that moment. So it didn't usually happen. But on the other hand, a friend of mine slept with another friend of mine in exactly this way. She didn't mind him knowing and he didn't mind paying. So most sex workers screen our clients. That means we have their personal info to run a background check and make sure we're not about to get arrested or murdered. It also eliminates the chance of a creepy friend trying to secretly book us. When I was a cam girl, I would have many guys message me saying they were my cousin or something. They were not, just trying to play out a fetish, and I wasn't into it. So then one day a guy, in the main chat, said that he knew me and his name was AJ, fake name. I was like, yeah right, I've only ever known one AJ, if it's true what's my name? And sure enough, he put my real first name right there in the chat. We were in youth group in church together almost a decade before that. He became a regular. I had a friend who was a lifestyle drum. For those unfamiliar with BDSM lingo, a female dominant, not professionally, just personally for fun. She is into a lot of freaky stuff, but working in the public, she is very secretive about her identity. No pictures of herself online, and very cautious before meeting anyone. Well, she has had guys message her asking her for some pretty nasty stuff, like bottling her piss and selling it to them, or even making a shit sandwich on one occasion. Yes, an actual shit sandwich. Well, the F up part is, she messages with these guys, and they, without her asking, reveal all sorts of personal details about themselves, like where they live or work, and they would send her photos of themselves. On more than one occasion, she has run into one of them at work, and they had no idea it was her. She recognized them and think to herself, this guy that begged me to make him lick his own cum off my feet. And he has no idea who the F I am. It would just make her feel even more powerful. Although she remained perfectly professional in their interactions. But may have acted a little bitchier than she normally would, because she knew they liked it. Kinda, sorta along the same lines, I guess. Once a friend wanted me to go to a strip club with him located outside a small town in Alabama. A young, really young, looking girl got on the stage, and he told me, "Look at her. Isn't she the prettiest thing you've ever seen?" I said, "Yeah, but she seems like she's too young to be working here." "Don't worry. She's 18. How do you know?" I asked. "She's my niece." I felt uncomfortable after that. Up here. And wow. Just wow. I was not expecting my post to get as much attention as it did. As a matter of fact, I thought it was such a throwaway comment that it didn't occur to me to even follow up on it. But to address all the comments and messages I've gotten because of it, it happened in a small club way out in the county outside a town named Harvest, Alabama. I don't know why it's so important to folks to know that, unless they are expecting to go there and see the girl for themselves. Fat chance of that happening. It was about 10 years ago, so I seriously doubt she would still be there. Another thing, so many are casting doubt about his character or the nature of his relationship with the girl. Trust me, his tone was that of a proud uncle, not a dirty, lusty one. You would have to know the area. Meth and opioids have decimated rural Alabama, to the point that it's refreshing to find a young person that is healthy and making an honest living. Besides that, I had known him for years. You will not find a more religious, God-fearing person. I was in the process of booking with a sex worker, and she sent me a few face pics that she didn't post in her ad. That's when I realized she was actually my cousin. I politely told her that I couldn't meet and never said anything to anyone, including her. About 10 years after I graduated college, my fraternity had a reunion during homecoming. One of my fraternity brothers was walking around with a very pretty woman in tow, introducing her to everyone as his fiancée. This guy was not a ladies' man in any way. In fact, he was the kind of guy who had no luck at all with women despite his family's wealth. So I thought, good for him. The kid couldn't get a date, and now look at him. But then I started looking closer at the woman. She kind of bore a resemblance to this stripper I remembered from a few years ago. The druggy one who used to give hand jobs in the champagne room. But I dismissed it. Couldn't be her. Later at the party, she pulled me into an empty room, looked at me pleadingly and said, "Please don't tell him." Was an RA in college, and had a pair of residents on my wing who were both cam girls. Found out from rumors that were eventually confirmed, when I had to help both of them get back up to their room after calling the paramedics. Because they were passed out drunk outside our residence hall. Came into their room, and saw the camera set up, dildos, and lingerie sets or pieces, just laying out in the open. I also found out that night, that they had a pet kitten in the room. Another rumor I heard about them that ended up being true, but also heard they abused it pretty bad, poor thing. Anyways, as we made it up to their wing, one of the girls came to, just as we entered their room and tried to play with the pet kitten. She rolled off the bed from her side, stumbled across the room in just a few steps, and ended up falling face first into the makeshift litter box they had set up for their cat. Cat shit and cat litter flung everywhere. Our campus PD was so confused when they showed up to find sex toys and cat litter everywhere. Their dorm room nearly looked like a crime scene. What a time college was. What a time. In college, one of my girlfriend's suite mates used to model nude for the art classes. Fast forward about 8 years, I went to a bachelor party for a friend, and we all went to a strip club. One stripper came out wearing the naughty schoolgirl outfit and I recognized her as my girlfriend's suite mate. As I was turning to tell my friend, the groom, that I knew her, he turned to me, and said he knew her. Turns out that when he managed a restaurant, she was one of his servers. His brother thought this was hilarious, and paid her to do a lap dance for my friend. She had a great figure, but my friend never took his eyes off hers to where she would see him looking at her body. Even when she turned her back to him, he looked at the back of her head because he felt so uncomfortable. Somewhat related, me and buddy, Tom, go to this sleazy strip club in different part of town. As soon as we walk in, he sees bartender he went to high school with who say, "Tom, you perv. What are you doing here?" I had a classmate who was a stripper, and she was very open about loving it when people she knew came to see her at work, and let her dance for them. She thought it was intimate in a fun, friendly way. Not a sex worker, but delivered a pizza to a known sex worker, and at the same moment I was about to knock on the door, a relative opens the door and watches me holding the pizza up to him. I couldn't do anything but laugh. He laughed too, maybe out of embarrassment, and as soon as the sex worker understood what was going on, she also started laughing. Never mentioned this moment to anyone who knows my relative. And he is grateful for that to this day. I was not a sex worker at all, but I was a fine art model for a college for a while. There were so many people that I went to high school with that entered those classes over the 2 years I worked there. Usually, they wouldn't say anything, and I wouldn't say anything. And I would just get naked and pose for 3 hours, lol. Sometimes we would chat after, but sometimes we would ignore each other and pretend it didn't happen. We surprised a friend from university that was working at a strip club to pay for her studies. She just noticed us, winked at us, and did her show as usual. 0 F of any kind were given by anyone. I had a friend at uni that was a stripper. I only found out because she got really drunk one night and told me. I always wondered how she managed to never get found out, but apparently it's 'cause students are always broke and can't afford it. If they ever do, it tends to be on a holiday abroad or a stag do, not in their uni town. I don't really qualify as a sex worker. I'm a guy who F women on camera for porn producers. So I'm not paid and I don't have customers. But one time, I showed up to a shoot for a blow bang, and ran into the guy who owned and operated the CrossFit place I went to. We acknowledged the connection on the set and performed our roles. But basically never spoke of it again and resumed our normal trainer or customer dynamic after that. He was married at the time, but I think they were open, not that it was any business of mine. My mom was a stripper when I was in elementary school. A 22-year-old guy came in and paid for a lap dance. And my mom recognized his last name and asked if he knew Ruth. I have no earthly idea why she would ask him given what she suspected. He got weirded out and said that Ruth was his mom, and my mom said that his mom was her daughter's third-grade teacher. He then begged her not to tell his mom where he was. Apparently, my mom just laughed and said she didn't want her daughter's teacher knowing that she was there either. I hated that teacher. She was such a jerk to me because we were poor, and my mom always dressed slutty. I'm glad her kids weren't as uptight as she was. I worked in a brothel in my hometown. Before the brothel, I worked at a pharmacy owned by a man I got along especially well with. We had a very close friendship and mutual feelings for one another, except he was married, and so we addressed the feelings but never acted on them. He always said he wished he had a time machine so he could go back in time and be with me, and that whoever I dated would be the luckiest man in the world, etc. One day at the brothel, some dude booked me and I accepted the booking. When I got in the room, I noticed he was my old boss's son I had met a few times when he had come to see his dad. He said he had been fantasizing over me since he had met me, which was weird because in the pharmacy I never looked decent, and it was so weird sleeping with him. He had the same smile and eyes as his dad, and it really tripped me out. He became sort of besotted by me. He found me on Facebook, and would ask me when I was working, or if he could come over. It was weird because he knew I had feelings for his dad and really didn't care. One day he was pestering me, so one of my co-workers suggested I say to him I will agree to have a booking with him if he brings in a pair of his father's dirty underwear. He was freaked out, but actually considered it. I told him I was joking and wouldn't be seeing him again. I felt guilty and weird, it was too close to home. One of my friends still works for his dad and he can be difficult to work for. She always says once she quits she will say, "I quit, and cat cube F your son." Guys from school and stuff would come in, but generally I would avoid them or just decline if I knew they were choosing me because they knew me. It's just easier not to mix things. Clients don't seem to understand that it's completely transactional and that I'm not interested in talking to them for free. Last semester, I ran a massage service, and I had this one client I particularly liked because he was so friendly, positive, and just smart as F. I never asked my clients for their last names or too much about what they did for work, and the only thing I really knew about this guy was that he was in a STEM field. Well, fast forward to one existential crisis and a college major change later, and this semester, I have to take chemistry. Lo and behold, that really smart client is now my professor. Neither of us is currently acknowledging it, but I can tell that we still feel that bit of connection we did when he would come see me for massages. I was a stripper back in the day. Halfway through a stage show, realized that my flatmate's brother and his friends were there. That's how I was outed, lol. Nothing much changed. In the mid-90s my friends took me to a strip club for my bachelor party. A few cocktails and a few stage shows in and out walks an ex-girlfriend of mine. She was stunningly beautiful, but bat crap crazy. My friends desperately tried to get her to give me a lap dance, offering her 5 times the normal rate, but she refused. She said it would be too much of an emotional strain for her considering how intense our relationship was and ended. She ended up sitting with us between her floor shows and lap dances just chatting. She had gotten actually married and this was a way for her and her husband to save for a house. About halfway through the evening one of the other dancers grabbed me and pulled me up on stage, whispered into my ear, "Are you wearing underwear?" Which I affirmed. She pulled my pants down, sat me on a chair mid-stage, and another girl loosely tied my hands behind my back. Each girl took turns giving me a lap dance up on the stage. Turns out my ex paid them all for a lap dance and arranged the entire thing. Funny end to the story, after that event I was at work on the sales floor of a local big box retail chain working and in walks my ex. We chatted and have a good laugh. My lunch came and I went out into the mall towards the food court and my ex comes up besides me with a bit of a panicked look in her eye. She slides her arm under mine and leans in and kisses me on the cheek saying let's go get that hot dog now. Befuddled I walk with her towards the food court and she proceeds to tell me one of her regulars was in the mall and he was stalking her. She told him she was married and he didn't believe her so I got to play the part of her husband. I walked her out to her car after the hot dog and a leisurely chat to make sure she was safe and never heard from her again. Not exactly someone I knew well, but I went on a Tinder date with a guy, went to see a movie, nothing exciting. Nice enough guy, but no chemistry. It also didn't stay in contact. Opened my hotel door to my client one night to see him standing there, didn't react to the fact that I knew him, because there's not a single person who knows what I do. Spent the entire booking telling me how sad he was we never caught up again, and how he knew it was me when he saw my photos. Photos were blurred and face cropped out but I've got distinguishing hair, and how it must be fate. Played dumb the whole time, because this guy knew my actual identity and eventually asked him to leave because of how uncomfortable his behavior was making me. I used to get Denny's in Los Angeles every day I worked. It would be the wee early hours and I'd get a bunch of bacon and eggs. It was only me and this one woman ever in there at this hour. I asked her one day, hey, you know we are both the only two people here, wanna share a table? She said yes and we'd eat together. I found out she was a dancer. She seemed like a genuinely great human being and we talked about her life. One day a bunch of her friends from work came with her and I sat by myself so as to not assume anything. Well, she and they moved to sitting all around where I was sitting. I felt really special then, like someone actually enjoyed my time and conversation. This was a pretty low point in my life but I always remember this and smile. I'm glad you watched out for her. Everybody needs a guardian angel sometimes. I was a bouncer at a strip club in the college town I went to school in. I did run into some of my classmates from campus at work. Sometimes they'd come in for amateur night and get offered a job. Other times they worked for an agency and would end up there for a night for whatever reason. It was kind of an unspoken rule to not say anything. If we bumped into each other on campus I'd say hi to them. I ended up in a group project with one of them. It wasn't weird, it was like working on something in school with a co-worker. I would say the only weird thing was ending up at a keg party where one of my co-workers was there, and when the cops came to bust it up I felt compelled to warn her and get her out of there before anything bad happened. I've never been able to resolve why I felt I needed to have done that. Not a sex worker, but a girl from my high school became a somewhat popular cam model or amateur porn creator. Nearly 50 million views on PH. My school was small so everyone knew everyone and she dated a good friend of mine for a while. As if she was fitting a stereotype, she was the very quiet nerdy shy girl in high school. I found out what she did, but made no attempt to reach out to her because I had no reason. One day I came across her porn Snapchat account so I added it. My screen name on there is pretty much my full name so it wasn't like I was trying to be sneaky, however I assumed she was too busy to look at when people add her on things. Shockingly enough she messaged me later that day and we chatted normally. She was super nonchalant about everything. Apparently another kid from our high school found out and went into her chat room spamming her real name followed by question marks. So she politely asked that I didn't do that. Seemed pretty reasonable. This was a few years ago. We are from the US but she ended up moving to a major city in Europe. I happened to be visiting the area last year with my cousin for a backpacking trip, so on a whim I decided to send her a Snapchat saying I was in town. Again I assumed she would be bogged down with messages from other people that she'd never even bother to look. To my surprise again, she got back to me right away and we met for lunch later that week. I told my cousin we are meeting a friend and I informed him what she does for a living, but I told him not to bring it up unless she does. I wasn't sure how open she was about it in her day-to-day life. Sure enough, she showed up to lunch wearing a PH-branded Letterman jacket with her stage name on the back. Kind of set the tone for what she was cool with talking about. Lunch was fantastic, we just chatted and caught up. She said we could ask her whatever we wanted to know, so all of my questions were about what it took for her to move to Europe. She also gave us tips of places to see while we were in town. TLDR, a quiet girl from my high school, who I hadn't seen or talked to in years, moved away and became a cam model. While I was on vacation I decided to reach out to her on a whim, and we had a very wholesome lunch. Former sex worker here. I worked as an escort in a smallish city for many years and showed my face in my advertising to prevent these kinds of awkward encounters. My partner at the time knew that I was an escort and was very supportive. One day a guy who worked with my partner booked me without recognizing me. We'd met at some work drinks a few weeks before and I chatted with him and his wife for an hour or so, but I probably looked quite different out of context. I recognized him immediately and explained that we'd met before without explaining how I knew him, to protect my partner's privacy. I said that we're likely to run into each other again as we ran in the same circles and he'd really appreciate not having slept together should that happen. He was perplexed, but keen to hang out for the hour and relax platonically just to get away from work. About a month later he showed up at my partner's birthday drinks, the penny dropped and he actively tried to avoid us both, haha. I slept with their former boss as well, who I recognized but he didn't recognize me. Also slept with an ex-boyfriend's brother. We didn't recognize each other but he mentioned his very specific family dynamic and I realized I'd met him at his family Christmas a few years beforehand. I'm a stripper. My friend's dad came in. I hadn't seen him or my friend since high school. I accidentally asked him for a lap dance before I could tell who it was. He said no and I realized who it was as I walked away. He came in a few more times and avoided eye contact with me. When I was on stage he would look away. Another story, my first day as a stripper I saw two guys from my high school. We chatted, then they both paid for lap dances.
This is Reddit Joe channel, and don't forget to hit subscribe down below for more upcoming videos.